Sounds good. Welcome, everyone. We're just going to give it another minute. All right, we'll give it about like another 30 seconds. We'll jump right in. We've got a lot of stuff to cover today. Definitely see some familiar names and faces. This is great. Okay, so I think we'll just let folks kind of funnel in and get us started. We got a lot of things to cover today. So thank you everyone for joining us. I know many of you are likely having lunch. Feel free to, shut your camera off if you want, have your lunch. We will have some breakout discussions as well today for folks to learn from one another. But first, we'll just start off with introductions. My name is Naji Nunnally, pronouns he, him, his. I'm a community engagement specialist, and I will pass it over to Sam to introduce.
Thank you, Naji. Hi, I'm Sam Burles. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm also another community engagement specialist at MAPC. So happy to be in space with you all.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Sam. So I think what we'll do is we'll jump right in and I will share my screen. All righty. Can everyone see my screen? Perfect. So thank you again for everyone for being here with us today. This is our third installment of our community engagement series, and today we'll be covering our community engagement process. But before we start off, if everyone could just enter in their chat their name, pronouns, and the agency or organization they work with, that would be great so everyone can kind of get familiar with each other and get a feel for who's in the space. And we'll give folks about a minute or so to input that. And then Sam, just let me know just kind of what are the themes in terms of organizations and municipalities joining us. Just because I can't really see the chat. And those of you that may be having a challenge navigating Zoom, if you just look at the bottom of your screen or your device, just select chat and feel free to type away.
Yeah, right now it looks like a lot of municipal staff from a good variety of different cities and towns. So welcome everyone.
Perfect.
Got some Somerville, Malden, Cape Ann, Cambridge, Natick.
Cool. Alrighty, great. So before we go, we already did this. So before we go any further, first we would just like to start off with our group agreements. These are essentially our shared understands that we like to put in place prior to doing any group discussions. So just reading them off, listen for understanding, not disagreement. Consider the opinions and experiences of others. Bring a spirit of experimentation and creativity. Step up, step back, take turns speaking, make room for others to speak, and lastly, just have fun. Now we will jump into our agenda. We'll be covering a few things today. So we'll just do a general introduction and overview. What is the community engagement process? How to apply the community engagement process. We'll do 2 discussions and 2 share outs. And then lastly, we will just close it off and we will have a prompt for folks to respond to as well. So first, we would like to just set the foundation with what is MAPC, which is the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. We are a regional planning agency located in Boston. We've been around since the early 1960s. We cover 101 towns and cities, as you can see to the map to the right. These 101 towns and cities are broken into 8 subregions. We are a public funded consulting agency to help with planning. We take a holistic approach to planning. Yes, we have departments like land use and like housing, but we also look at things community members need to thrive. Additionally, some of our areas include community engagement, arts and culture, public health, and environment, just to name a few. In terms of our community engagement conversations, again, this is the third installment of that series. On the left, we have the objectives for the series, and on the right, we have our objectives today, which include develop a shared understanding of MAPC's community engagement process, share how MAPC applies the community engagement process in projects and initiatives, hear how you will apply the community engagement process in your respective work, and share your own engagement processes with other fellow attendees. Before we jump into the community engagement process, first we want to recap our last session that Gloria led. These are just some of the key takeaways that Gloria spoke to. We looked at the stakeholder definition and its historical roots, MAPC's approach, preparing for a stakeholder analysis, designing a stakeholder analysis tool, facilitating your discussion with respective stakeholders, and lastly, you've done all the work now, so what comes next? Now we will move into our community engagement process. So in terms of what is the community engagement process, which we also refer to as our community engagement wheel, first, we want to just frame it up in terms of how we use it and why is it a process? Why is this a model? This isn't a linear process where it starts and stops, but one that is cyclical in nature, meaning that the process occurs in cycles. The process is informed by the event scale and project scale. So we think about engagement at various scales, the scale of a project as a whole, but also the individual engagement method or moment and how it relates to overarching project goals. And lastly, relates to the spectrum of engagement, but allows continuity between engagements and tying back to the purpose. So in terms of the process itself, in particular in our previous sessions, we spent time discussing the first two prongs of the process, which are purpose and stakeholders. For more information, feel free to review those recordings, but briefly, this is how we define each. So in terms of purpose, in general, this is something that Javier spoke to during that first session and Gloria as well during the last session about stakeholder analysis. The purpose should be centered throughout all projects and engagements. The purpose, which we refer to is as the why. It very much informs how and what we do. And each part of this process comes back to purpose. Next, on to stakeholders. This is very much about understanding who are the people or organizations that you want to engage, who should be prioritized, what informs that decision. Engaging these stakeholders should be something that is reciprocal and not just extractive. Engaging stakeholders should happen early in your process. Next, onto resources. This can look like many things and not just money. What are some resources that already exist in a community, for example? What resources are needed and needed to do the things in a sustainable way? Next, in terms of communications, this is key as we think about engaging with those stakeholders identified in the general public. What are the communication channels or platforms that will be used? Based upon the audience, particularly when we think about the general public, is it written in plain language? How frequent are the communications? Does the audience/reader know who to contact if they have questions? Is there a place to go to for more information? And then lastly is approach. So how will you go about directly engaging with your intended audience following the communications? What are things that should be mindful of leading up to an engagement and during an engagement? What will you do post-engagement? Is it a thank you message? Is it a recap of the engagement or what their contributions will funnel into? Just some things to consider. So what is partially cut off here at the top of your screen is key. And so this key includes the budget, language access, materials, timeline, and any technology and remote tools. And these are just things to be familiar with heading into an engagement or a full project/initiative, and really at each stage, of the process. Next slide. Sorry for the phone. So why is a community engagement process needed? Not only is this a great tool, but it's a model that very much helps us. So from a historical standpoint, the community engagement process would not be needed if planning and other sectors of work weren't so exclusionary through their practices and policies. Those same practices and policies were informed by harmful narratives. Those same narratives persist today and have created a present day culture broadly where putting communities, prioritizing communities who have been historically harmed and assaulted is an afterthought. And so we'll just lightly touch on bullet points 2 and 3. So it just helps us keep us organized and on track and brings others into the process. Also, it's an accountability tool. By clearly setting out the purpose of engagement at the start and using this tool iteratively, we can come back and reflect on whether we achieve that purpose of engagement. Lastly, it allows adaptability. Maybe you're presented with a new set of information. Maybe you're presented with a situation where you didn't have the greatest success and now have to pivot. Maybe the stakeholder group shifts. So I will land it there, and we will now transition to our discussion time for you all. So just some basic instructions. There will be 2 breakout group sessions that will take place. With this first one, it will be 10 minutes. And then when we bring everyone back to the main room, we will have 5 minutes for share outs. We'll call on about 2 or 3 groups to share out. When you get to your space, introduce yourselves to one another. Also, jot down on the PowerPoint slide deck that we will share any notes that come up from your discussions. And then when folks come back, like I said, we'll have about 2 or 3 groups share out any themes that they heard from their group. And so in terms of this first breakout period, we have 2 prompts for you all to answer. We will insert it into the chat and broadcast it out. Question number 1 is, how does this process relate to the work you do with your municipality or organization? And then the second question is, how would you apply this to your work? So I think this is a great opportunity for everyone to hear from one another and to also learn from one another. And so I will kick it to Sam to open up our breakout groups. Everyone should be prompted on their screen now to select join, and you will bring you to the breakout group assigned to you. If you have any challenges, feel free to let us know and we can support you with that. And I'm going to stop sharing screen. And thank you for elevating those challenges as well. The next group, someone else want to go? I'm sure there was a lot of good stuff discussed, so please. John.
Well, I won't say I'm going to speak for the entire group, so other members should chime in. But I mean, one thing we discussed was the importance of how to engage stakeholders. There are a lot of people that won't attend a sort of conventional community meeting, right? Because, you know, various barriers or not feeling like it's their place to go. And so there are other formats can be useful, like focus groups or community dinners or other other ways. And I think a lot of cities are using some pretty sophisticated outreach things like community engagement teams now. So that's important. And then Jay and our group also noted that, you know, it's important to take into account sort of the city staff perspective, and that sometimes you're stepping into a emotional situation where you kind of get to be the recipient of community or some community members concern, anger, that kind of thing. And so that can influence sort of how the process is set up, right? Because we're all human and we don't want to be subject to that. So we may set up the system to protect ourselves.
Appreciate that, John. Yeah, very key thing in there. We are all human. We all make mistakes. No one is perfect. We can all learn and grow. So appreciate that. Does another group want to share out? Cool. Is it Louisa?
Louisa, yes.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, I can share for our group. I think we were group 1, if I'm not mistaken. We talked a little bit about how community engagement looks different at different organizations, and then we chatted a little bit about some of the struggles that we have at each of our organizations, and then we shared some of the best practices or suggestions that we've had working with different amplifying voices in their respective regions to reach those people that have not been reached before. And then we also talked about different institutions that can be those platforms. So we talked about religious institutions, schools, resource fairs that you can attend, basically who else can be on your team to work through the community, because it's not all going to happen just through your office, especially if your team doesn't have as much capacity or as many resources to do that. So who can you connect with in the community, who can amplify your voice, and vice versa, and build that relationship.
Yeah, appreciate that. Yeah, partnership building, the collaboration, the collective work, are all just very key things and will all get us moving in the same direction. Before we go on to our next breakout session, were there any questions that maybe arise in the last breakout session that someone maybe wants to elevate here?
I thought one of the questions that came up, and it, although a pretty simple question, but I think it hits to the nail of everything we're doing, is like, how do you define your target audience? Like who are those people? And we didn't answer it. It wasn't something we're trying to do in that space, but I thought that could be something that bring up here.
For sure. Does anyone want to respond to that question? Any thoughts?
I have a thought that came up in our group, which is the access to language interpretation services, because of budgetary constraints in some of the, cities and towns. And I know that as a nonprofit organization, we work with municipalities, and we do struggle to find that. There's a nonprofit organization who I met recently through networking, and they are going to help us, I think. And that seems to me like I'm very happy that that's the way that this is coming together, rather than struggling to figure out the budget. It sort of appeared. And so that's one way that we're going to hopefully be able to enhance community engagement going forward through the organization.
Thank you for that. And so I'm just going to move us on to our second discussion. Can everyone see my screen? Great. So again, same instructions. If you all did not get a chance to introduce yourselves, please do this time around. Identify maybe someone different to be a note taker in that PowerPoint link that Sam shared out. And so our questions this time around is, what do you see as your personal role in bringing this process into your work? And what do you need to make that happen? So those are our questions. We will put those in the chat, and then we will begin our breakout groups. Everyone should be prompted to join a breakout space. It should be the same one you joined last time. And if you need any assistance, just let us know.
Hello again.
So having your tentacles go out further and knowing who exactly are the community players that you should engage with, There's also just the time factor. Everyone's very busy. There are typically champions within each community for different initiatives, and they only have so much capacity, and it's difficult to get a lot of champions for so many different needs. So that was one thing. And then our DCR person mentioned that they're looking into incentives for participation in meetings and things like that. I know where I work, we do offer like, sometimes like a children's activity, so people with young children feel like they have a safe place to bring their kids and have fun, and then they can be engaged in the meeting at hand. So that's helpful. But I do know some people can even offer monetary incentives, but that person that brought that up in our group indicated it can be difficult to make sure that that's equitable and how you distribute that. So there's also that challenge. If there's anyone else from my group, oh, and time, just time. If you're a municipal employee, it's nice to, I mean, I would love to spend every summer at our farmers market and reach out to people, but dang, if I could do that, man, I don't have that kind of time. That's it.
Cool. Thank you for that, Maria. John.
Um, so, a couple of people in our group were from Somerville, and they talked about how sometimes you organize a meeting and find out that the format doesn't work. So it's important to be flexible and have some ability to pivot and then try a different direction in terms of engagement, which of course takes time and resources, but that can be important. And we, overall noted, if the things we need is time, money, and staff, right? And then there was also discussion about sometimes there are projects where outside forces are the sort of key drivers, right? That at the municipal level you might not have control. So setting expectations can be important because the community can get frustrated if things aren't moving forward. But sometimes it might be federal funding is needed to make a project happen, and things are happening up there that you have no control over at the local level, or it's a private development project and market forces are influencing the pace at which things happen. So being able to explain that to the community is important. I think the other point was also sometimes there's not a whole lot you can do as a participant in a process, but there are at least some small things you can try to make sure are done well, like making sure materials are available and the necessary languages.
Appreciate that, John. And just want to reinforce that, aspect around flexibility. So many of our present day institutions were not designed to be flexible. And so as an organization, as an institution rep, what can you do in that regard? How can you better meet people's needs? How can you better meet people where they're at? What internal changes can happen? Taking a look at, what is in your area of control? You may not necessarily be responsible for developing or crafting the municipal-wide policies, but you may sit at particular tables where those discussions are being had. And so now what is in your area of influence, and very much looking to leverage the resources that are available, the relationships that have been cultivated, the privileges that you may have as well. We all have different privileges. So, leveraging that in order to be flexible. Again, just want to reinforce that. On to, don't want to mess up your first name, so I'm say last name Thompson.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ariane Thompson, and in my group, this is something that actually came up. I think probably because we were also having a little bit of confusion with which questions were for which breakout. But we were talking about kind of conversations about having community liaisons as a best practice. came up for addressing multiple things, one of which was having kind of continued engagement throughout the course of a project or a plan, in my case, working in a municipal planning office. But there's notable challenges to that method, like having enough resources, and making sure that we're not like asking too much of the community members that we're engaging with or of community liaisons that are consistently having to bridge that connection. So we're like also we're balancing like not asking too much of them, and having the resources to do that while also consistently trying to keep them involved in the process. And yeah, just kind of talking about that as a best practice, but also a challenge.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm taking a look at the time. We have about 6 or 7 minutes or so. So I'm just going to share my screen one more time. We do have one more prompt for you all. Can everyone see my screen? All right, cool. Some head nods, that works. So hopefully you felt like, that we covered, we accomplished today's objectives, which you can see here to the left. We have some closing questions just for you to think about as you exit the space. What's something that squared up or affirmed what you already know? Something that changed your thinking or is new knowledge to you, and something that has you thinking in a new direction that you'll take forward and applying or learning more about. And so if everyone could just take a moment to, in the chat, respond to what we have in this teal, which is, what is one way you apply the process, the community engagement process, to your work moving forward? So if everyone could just take a moment to enter that into the chat, we will try to read a couple out, but if not, that's something our team will take a look at, and that provides us better insights to better support you all as well. So give that about a minute or so. I can't see the chat, but like I said, I'll give it about a minute or so. What is one way you'll apply the community engagement process to your work moving forward? So as you all are entering those responses, I'll just move us along. So I just want to highlight our next community engagement conversation. We don't have one for the month of December, but we will be restarting again in January with our 4th installment, establishing relationship foundations, which will be led by Sam, who is providing tech support today. And then last couple points is feel free to reach out to us. Like one of the things that I think a couple of you raised was around incentives. That is a common practice of ours here at the Community Engagement Department and at MAPC, something that we kind of consult with many different communities and partners on as well. And not only is it just providing it, but before you even get to providing the incentives, it's like, okay, what strategies do you need to build up? We can also assist you and support you in that regard. We can support you around language access, stakeholder analysis, the community engagement process, just so many different things. And we have a great team as well that could just support you. And if you need to contact us, feel free to reach out to our community engagement department, communityengagement@mapc.org, and we will input that into the chat. And we have just a few minutes left, so I will stop sharing screen and we will just read out a few of these responses. Let me see, get caught up. Start with consensus building at the internal level to more clearly engage with your communities. I want to take an inventory of the resources that I have available for community engagement on project by project basis. We'll be looking at how they can apply this and update their process. Attending the session reminded me of the importance of events like this to meet people outside of my community who have good ideas. Know that is one of your questions, but I want to talk to you. That my position is to bridge the gap between the public and it's cut off, but industry, speaking in plain language and meeting people where they're at. So there's a variety of different ones, but hopefully folks felt like, you were able to gain something from today's session. You were able to learn from someone. You were able to make a connection in this space. Feel free to follow up with folks and continue those connections. And maybe there's some partnership and collaboration that comes after that. And yeah, I know we have a couple minutes left, so if anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask away, and I'm sure other folks will have some responses.
Would you be able to share your screen with the future events really quick?
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
Gotcha. So, should be this. Yep, so we have one slated for January, February, March, April, and May.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Any last minute comments or questions? All righty. Well, I will give folks a couple minutes back on their day. So again, thank you so much for folks that were able to stay with us and engage, and hopefully you learned something, and feel free to reach out at any point. Have a great day. Have a great weekend.